Why won't Australia's mainstream media or Australia's TV media investigate Australia's deadliest medical scandal, contaminated blood? G'day, my name is Charles Mackenzie and I'm the President of Infected Blood Australia. And just recently, people have been asking me, why is it that the mainstream media can't look into thousands of infections from tainted blood transfusions or from tainted blood products? We've also got people overseas who routinely have their media report on the globe's worst medical scandal, which was contaminated blood. Australia wasn't the only nation to suffer this. Right now, the UK's largest ever legal inquiry is looking into their contaminated blood scandal. And it's reported on the BBC and it's reported on the British media. And interestingly, the British contaminated blood scandal is also reported on in Australia. Yesterday, Sky News Australia reported on the latest revelations about the British contaminated blood scandal. Now, that raises an interesting point. So I've got people overseas saying, well, how come the Australian media doesn't look at the elephant in its own room? Thousands of Australians infected from blood transfusions, members of the bleeding disorders community, people with, say, haemophilia, 1,400 lives lost. There are still survivors, haemophiliacs suffering with liver cancer and cirrhosis and those sorts of terrible afflictions. But they can't get any help and they can't get any media. So let me answer the question. Okay, so in Canada, they had a scandal. They had a contaminated blood scandal. And through the great efforts of Canadians, they were able to have a wonderful legal investigation which answered questions for Canadians. That was in the 90s. Then the Irish had one in the 2000s. They had a legal inquiry and that answered their questions. They knew that terrible wrongdoing had occurred and they did the right thing and helped families affected. Now we've got the British and they understand completely that contaminated blood was knowingly distributed to patients just as it was here in Australia. So, okay, but in Australia, our public broadcaster, the ABC, they won't touch it. Victims have written to them pleading for them to investigate, to the prestigious program Four Corners. Every Australian knows about Four Corners, don't we? If something's a scandal, Four Corners will look at it. But over 30 years, they have steadfastly said no to looking at Australia's deadliest medical scandal. Then you've got 60 Minutes. We all know that, don't you? We've gone to them for years. Channel 9, 60 Minutes, won't have a bar of us. Channel 7, don't want to know us. Channel 10, SBS, the list goes on. No Australian media, no Australian television media will ever look at our deadliest medical scandal. Okay, well, here's the difference. The reason that they might look in Canada and they might look in the UK and they might look in Ireland is because those nations did not produce their first $100 billion company out of their tainted blood scandal. That's the problem. When ever a journalist in Australia goes looking into the haemophilia issue or the bleeding disorders scandal where 1,400 haemophiliacs lost their lives, they come up against this company CSL, this $100 billion Goliath that everyone's afraid of. I've been campaigning for 30 years. I've been asking questions about CSL for decades. And I'm met with, oh, well, you can't do that because it might affect their share price. You know, the Labor Party, our opposition in Australia, the federal opposition, you can go and look at on the internet. You'll see that in the 90s, they were saying no to investigations into this company CSL because it might affect their share price. And the Liberal government are no better either. And so when journalists ring up this CSL and say, well, look, what's happening? And can you answer questions about, children knowingly being given tainted blood? They just get shut down. They just say, oh, you've been talking to that Charles Mackenzie, or you've been talking to those crazy tainted blood victims. Don't listen to them. They're crazy. Don't do any research. Don't do any investigations. Nothing to see here. Just move on. And if you don't, we'll sue you. And if you don't, we'll end your careers. Okay? Or worse. Okay, so basically we've got a very afraid media down here in Australia. This is why we're appealing to media internationally. Come on, guys. You know that the blood supplies around the world were compromised in the 1980s. These guys are saying that Australia had the best, safest blood supply in the world. What a load of rubbish. They won't even tell us how many thousands of people they've infected or killed. So, if there's any international media or anyone internationally who wants to help us down here because we've got this $100 billion Goliath who makes sure that we can never get any press, we can never get any help for our haemophiliacs or our contaminated blood families. Thank you, and that's the reason why no one knows about our deadliest medical scandal.